Hello and welcome to YTV. I'm Raleigh, Cavero.
And I'm Madison, Alworth. Today we start our show by bringing you an exclusive opportunity to meet two of Yale's 3 Rhodes Scholars.
They join us today to tell us about their accomplishments here on campus, the process to become a Rhodes Scholar, and their hopes for the future.
We'd like to welcome Isabel and Susanna Fritzberg. Isabel is a double major in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology and the history of science and medicine, with a focus in chronic disease like diabetes. And Susanna is a women's gender and sexuality studies major interested in poverty research.
Rhodes Scholarships are awarded to 2 students in 16 districts across the country. Isabel is one of the 2 recipients from District 3, that's New York State, and Susanna is one of the 2 recipients from Washington, or District 14.
Thanks for joining us, ladies.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
First off, congratulations on this honor. Tell us about the moment when each of you got the news.
It was really exciting. We had just finished our interviews and the committee had deliberated for a couple of hours. They came in and announced it, and I embarrassingly started crying. I was just really shocked, but it was really fabulous news.
Pretty much the same thing. I was completely stunned. There were 15 other really talented, completely intimidating candidates in my district, and hearing my name was not something I was expecting. So really, really a wonderful surprise.
That's great. And the Rhodes Scholarship is known for its intensive interview process. So can you tell us how both of you prepared for it and what the ultimate process was like?
The advice that I had been given was to think of the Rhodes interview as essentially a conversation with really smart people, which is something that I spend a lot of my time doing here at Yale. So it's also a little bit like a social experiment. I had a lunch one day, and then my interview actually was that same day. So I just tried to be as engaging as I could, and talked about current events and Rob Ford, who just got arrested for crack. And then to prepare for the interview, I did a series of mock interviews, tried to think of my greatest weakness, like bad posture, or greatest strength, preparing for pretty much any question that they might throw at me.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, I think the best advice that I got was honestly just to be true to who you were. I think you're really, in these mock interviews, you're really kind of given a lot of different types of advice, and it gets a little bit overwhelming. So the night before, I just went into it saying I just had to be who I was and be honest and be genuine. And I think that's kind of how I tried to approach the whole thing.
Well, it worked out. And Cecile Rhodes, under whose will this scholarship was established in 1903, had a vision for leaders who would, quote-unquote, fight the world's fight. So in what ways do you think you embody this vision? What do you want to fight for?
Absolutely. So that's actually the biggest reason I applied to the scholarship in the first place, was I thought that it would give me the tools to do the work that I wanted. So I'm really interested in chronic disease. I'm particularly interested in diabetes, which is going to be one of the world's biggest burdens in the next 20 years. So I'm hoping to use my time at Oxford and the research I learned as a way to really prepare me for a career dedicated to diabetes on a global scale.
On a similar note, I am really interested in changing how in America we deal with the poor and how we think about the poor. Half of Americans are going to have lived under the poverty line before they reach old age, and that is not reflected in the policies and increasingly limited and restrictive programs that we use as part of our welfare system. And I'm passionate about using the opportunity to study in the UK as a way to both study with some really fascinating and fantastic welfare scholars, and also observe firsthand the more inclusive approach to social policy programs that characterizes Britain.
That's great. And you both talked about this a little bit, but can you guys give us a little more detail on where you see your career path leading after Oxford, perhaps your ideal job that you would see yourself getting?
Certainly. So I'm passionate about domestic poverty policy. So I certainly see myself coming back to the United States. I would love to work for a government agency, for example, the New York Center for Economic Opportunity, or perhaps the Department of Health and Social Services back in Seattle, where I'm from. I think grand ambitions is probably to do poverty policy on a national scale, likely as part of a presidential administration.
And I think I'm a little bit more global, so I'm interested in working for international medical relief organizations. I really want to work for the UN or the World Health Organization or even something like Doctors Without Borders, and helping them direct on and implement their chronic disease programs, which are currently not what they focus on. So kind of helping health organizations shift their focus to diabetes, hypertension, and obesity.
All right, now one last question, and this one's a tricky one. Oxford's residential college system is even more intense than Yale, so which one do you think you guys are going to pick for your new home?
I really have no idea. I'm actually really stressed about it. We have to pick pretty soon. There are a couple I have in mind, but I still haven't made any choices yet.
Yeah, it's not a bad problem to have, but it's an interesting one. I think we got a taste of collegiate Gothic here at Yale, and I'm pretty eager for actual Gothic. So I'm drawn to some of the really old, beautiful ones, but I haven't made up my mind quite yet. We'll figure it out.
Well, I'm sure both of you will figure that out. You figured out much more difficult things in the past. Isabel and Susanna, thank you so much for coming in. Congratulations again, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you
to be
so
here.
much.
Earlier this week, the university was shaken by the loss of another community member of Yale. On Monday, the news reported the death of assistant professor of English Samuel C. On November 24th, C was found dead in a New Haven jail cell. A day earlier, the police had detained C after responding to a report of domestic abuse at his Wooster Square home, where he had been fighting with his estranged husband, Sunder Ganglani. The cause of C's death remains unclear, although trauma from a head wound sustained during the arrest has been ruled out. C was on leave from teaching this semester and had begun working on a book. He was 34 years old.
And you might want to rethink what you're doing on Wednesday nights, depending on the outcome of a current legal battle between Toads and Yale. The cause of the conflict? The walkway between Toads and Morey's. Yale owns the space, and the previous agreement allowed Toads to use it for emergency exits. In 2008, Yale didn't renew the license. The attorney for the owner of Toads, James Segaloff, explained that without an efficient fire exit, the fire marshal could shut Toads down.
Although Yale is attempting to reduce its nearly $40 million budget deficit, cuts are not coming to student jobs or financial aid. Yale's financial aid budget, which has nearly quadrupled since 2002, was $119 million in 2013 and currently excuses the parental contribution for families earning less than $60,000 annually.
Director of Student Financial Services Cesar Storlazzi said that even in the event of future changes to financial aid, those will not affect current students or applicants to the class of 2018.
And with finals fast approaching, stress is at an all-time high on campus. We spoke to students to see how they are feeling about exams and about the shortened reading week.
As the semester comes to a close, final exams are quickly approaching. As of December 6th at 5:30 p.m., reading period began and will extend over the next 6 days up until the beginning of exams on December 12th.
I'm pretty exhausted. I just pulled 2 all-nighters in a row. And it's just like the work leading up to finals, so I haven't even gotten to study yet. So it's getting pretty overwhelming rather quickly.
This is the 3rd semester with a reading period of less than a week.
I really wish they had made finals longer, final week longer, because I know that they had cut it down to make the whole fall break, and which I really appreciate. But at the same time, I would just absolutely love to have some extra time at the moment.
I'm not feeling so hot about that. I'd rather we had a reading week rather than a fall break and then a shorter reading period. But I guess, I know for some people they really liked having a new fall break. For me, I just prefer to sit down and have a week to think things through and make sure I'm ready for exams.
However, some students prefer the shorter reading period.
The longer the period is, I'd find that I'd work less hard every day, if you know what I mean. If it's short, it's intense, and you just get the work done.
I think it's going to be good. I feel I haven't experienced it yet, so I don't know how much time I need to study, but right now it feels a bit unnecessary. It's I feel like I can do without it. I don't need it, but we'll see after I do the final.
I don't know, we'll just take them as they come. Work hard next week, and hopefully they'll be alright.
In 2 weeks, Yaleys can relax over their winter break. But for now, it's off to the library.
Thanks, Lily. Final exams begin on Thursday.
After 3 years of planning, the Board of Aldermen has approved the Coliseum project.
The plan proposes to redevelop the site of the former New Haven Coliseum. a sports arena that stood on the spot until 2007. The recent proposal is to construct a mixed-use space that includes residential, hotel, retail, and office units. The project, which will not be completed until after 2018, is projected to cost almost $396 million and create 2,800 full-time jobs. Construction will begin next summer. And on Tuesday afternoon, that's only a little over a week after Yale's own gunman scare, the University of New Haven dealt with a lockdown situation of its own. The lockdown was announced after an Asian male carrying a rifle was seen across the street from campus. Within a half hour of the sighting, West Haven police apprehended a suspect, UNH student William Dong. The school was locked down for 5 hours during the afternoon as police searched each room on campus. Dong's reasons for carrying the rifle are still unclear, but no injuries have been reported.
On Wednesday, Connecticut Superior Court Judge Elliot Prescott announced that the 911 calls from Sandy Hook Elementary School on the morning of December 14, 2012, will be made available to the public.
This came after the state's Freedom of Information Commission began pushing for the recordings to be released to the Associated Press. Some criticized the release of the tapes, saying that it unnecessarily brings back horrible and tragic memories of that day.
Wrestling lost its varsity status in 1991 because of budget cuts and Title IX compliance. But it's recently returned to campus with a newfound passion thanks to coaches and captain Michael Robinson and Zach Belway. We go to Kate Walker for more.
Thanks, guys. Here at Yale, wrestling is a tradition with over 100 years of history. In 1903, Yale and Columbia competed in the first intercollegiate wrestling match, and former President William Taft was an intramural heavyweight wrestling champion in his time as an undergraduate. Now, 16 Yalees are taking the first steps to returning the sport to its former glory. Since the team lost its varsity status in the early 1990s, maintaining enthusiasm for wrestling on Yale's campus has been a challenge. This year, team captains Michael Robinson and Zach Belway have tried to combat the dwindling numbers and the lack of participation by recruiting more athletes and increasing campus visibility. So far, it seems to be paying off.
Recent years and last 10 years, it's been in sharp decline. 2008 was the last year we had a professional coach, and then a few years after that we were down to like 5 or 6 people. This year we're totally revamping it, re-energizing it, and we're on the up and up right now.
We actually had a national qualifier last year, so that's something we're really proud of. This year we're definitely revamping, becoming a lot more competitive. We've sort of really brought back the program in terms of numbers, in terms of structure, so we're looking to be a hell of a lot more competitive.
Many members of the team were experienced high school wrestlers, and for them, the Yale Mats have become a place to continue or to rediscover their love for the sport.
Because I think people, once they wrestle, you really can't give up the sport. There's something about wrestling as different than any other sport, and it's really hard to give up.
Coming here, it's just hard to give up. It's a lifestyle, it's a community, it's a way to keep in shape.
This year, the team hosted its first tournament in over 10 years. But it has faced its fair share of challenges, like lack of space and limited time to practice.
So I think there's definitely positives and negatives of being a club as opposed to varsity. Being a club sport, you have a little more flexibility. A lot of the guys on the team, they can, have jobs, do other activities outside of just wrestling. At the same time, we all come from pretty much competitive high school programs, and there's definitely something that I think a varsity program has, because you have to show up to practice, you have to go to the lifts, and sometimes it's difficult to motivate the guys to come sometimes.
I mean, wrestling's a tough sport. Unless you're in the peak physical shape, you're going to get your butt kicked. It's hard to wrestle competitively, casually.
But I'd love a club team, say, with more use of a practice facility and an actual coach, because the captains do a great job, but there's really only so much you can do when we're coaching each other.
The team's captains have worked to counteract these challenges by bringing more energy to practice and growing the club's activity on campus.
Rather than just using it, a way to keep in shape, we're actually, treating it like a team, being excited about matches, having wrestling gear, telling everyone about it, advertising. So we got this is our biggest freshman class we've had since, definitely before 2009 when I started here. We're just increasing the energy of it. It's getting people excited. It's getting me excited.
With the beginning of the season approaching, these 16 Yaleys are hoping that their hard work will pay off soon. For YTV, this has been Kate Walker.
Thanks, Kate. Of course, with winter break approaching, Yale wrestlers might have to hit the mats back at home to get ready for this season.
And we end our show with our Everybody Has a Story segment. This week, we sat down with Venka LaFleur, Bill Clinton's former speechwriter. She's most remembered for Clinton's 1995 speech to Northern Ireland that encouraged hope for peace. She is currently a partner at West Wing Writers, a private speechwriting firm. Here are the highlights from that exciting interview.
Venka, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So, speechwriting, this is a very unique job in politics. It's a small world. How did you stumble into this?
So it's I fell into it by accident. The career found me, and the story is actually one that I like to tell because it began with an epic fail. I had wanted to be a diplomat. That was my life's dream. I was a French major at Yale. Went straight from Yale to SAIS, which is Johns Hopkins School of Foreign Policy, International Relations. And the second year of my master's program, I took the Foreign Service exam. And the way that it was offered back then was you took a standardized test in December. If you passed that, you were invited to take what they called an oral exam in the spring. And then you would find out at some point over the summer whether or not you had been accepted into the Foreign Service. And so I went through this process, and as I was waiting to get my scores back, I had an unpaid internship in Washington for Foreign Policy magazine, and all my friends were leaving town, and my lease was running out, and I was waiting to hear the news. And the envelope finally did come, and to my utter shock and dismay, I had failed the Foreign Service exam. But not only that, they had ranked me very high in what they called administrative ability, which at 24 I had none of. And they had ranked me very low in cross-cultural sensitivity and writing, which at 24 were the only two things I was pretty sure I was good at. So I really, I went into a tailspin. I had no plan B, and I frantically started informational interviewing in Washington. I was temping to make money to pay the rent. I called my mom, who came down for the weekend to try and buck me up. So the chronology is that 5 years after I failed the Foreign Service exam because I couldn't write, I became the speechwriter for the Secretary of State, spent a year there, went to the White House. And
Need some cross-cultural sensitivity
and
to do
yes,
that job, too.
I guess so. I guess so.
Well, let's talk about your work in the Clinton administration. A lot of people know President Clinton as a very talented off-the-cuff speaker. Was that difficult when writing speeches for him? Would you have to account for him going off script?
It wasn't difficult, and you know, in the foreign policy speeches, he tended to stick to the script more than in the domestic speeches. But he ad-libbed in those too. And we used to say, you know, we thought of him as a jazz musician, that he would riff. There was always, you know, you wanted to make sure you provided this very clear melody line, but he would riff, and almost invariably made it better. You know, came up with things you wish you had thought of. So, in terms of accounting for ad-libbing, the time constraint is just one to always be mindful of. And I think of that even now, you know, for anybody that I'm writing for, when you're given a fixed period of time, to make sure that you don't write more words than can be reasonably uttered in that period of time. You want to give people room to ad-lib, because I think it's important. A speech is a performance too, and you want to give people a little bit of room to feed off the room and to make adjustments in real time if they need to.
Is there a favorite speech that you worked on, or maybe you didn't work on, but it was part of an experience that you had at the administration?
I think for me, the sort of signature moment, the proudest moment of my time there was President Clinton's first trip to Belfast as a sitting president, which was in November, sort of end of November, beginning of December 1995. And it was a really important and exciting moment in the peace process in Northern Ireland. There was a ceasefire that had held. George Mitchell had just been named sort of a negotiator to try and work with the two sides. The United States had granted Jerry Adams a visa, which had been very controversial, but had broken some log jams and so forth. Anyway, it looked like it was a moment when things might actually happen. And the president went to Belfast, and the way that the speeches were set up that day, I was going to write his two big speeches in Belfast. So there was a big policy speech in the morning, and there was a Christmas tree lighting in front of Belfast City Hall that night. And the policy speech was held on the factory floor of a plant called Mackey's, which built machinery to weave textiles. And so if you can imagine, I mean, this idea of, you know, this textile machinery weaving fabric, it was symbolically, it was very much the kind of message that we wanted to bring about sort of knitting disparate peoples together. And this factory literally sat on the peace line, the line that divided the city, but it had a very progressive, enlightened general manager, and Protestants would walk in one door and Catholics would walk in the other in the morning, and they would meet on the factory floor. So this was this exciting location, meaningful moment. Bill Clinton, the President of the United States, arriving, and from the moment that the plane touched down in Northern Ireland, as the motorcade was driving into the city, there were people lined up along the road with flags waving, and we just kind of knew that it mattered that he was there. And he had gone over his draft on Air Force One as we were coming in, and he had made some changes to it, which I didn't know what he had changed. I didn't find out until after the fact what it was that he had put in. But he was happy with the draft, so I was happy. One of the things that we couldn't have anticipated, though, or that we didn't realize what it would be like until we were actually there. So the advance team had found 2 children to introduce the president. Wherever he went, we would try and have him introduced by what we called real people. And the real people in this case were these 2 young children, one Protestant, one Catholic. And they were there in their school uniforms, and they were each talking about what peace meant to them. And the first was a little boy who talked about peace meaning that he and his mates could play soccer in the street. Then the little girl went, and she was right out of Hollywood Central casting. She looked like a porcelain doll, just this beautiful, angelic little girl who got up, and she said that her first father had been killed during the Troubles. And now that there was the ceasefire and peace, she hoped that there would be peace for the children of Northern Ireland. She said about her father it was the saddest day of her life. It was just this moment. I mean, the whole place was just silent. And after the kids spoke, President Clinton came out, and think about an ad lib, he just kind of looked out at the room and he said, well, I think those 2 little children just told us everything we need to know about why we're here today. It was just one of those moments where you felt like the stage had been perfectly set. And the speech did go well, and that night, then he left Belfast, he went to Derry and gave a speech in Derry, came back for the Christmas tree lighting, and there were hundreds of thousands of people out in the street in front of Belfast City Hall. And Van Morrison was playing, and it was just this incredible moment. I think that there aren't many moments that you get to have where you feel like what you were a part of really mattered, that maybe some of the words that you helped to choose really mattered, and this is a case where I'd like to think they did.
Well, we'll end with a quick speed round, so just short questions, short answers. So the first one, favorite speech of all time? You have to choose one.
Yeah, I can't choose one. It's too hard to answer truly favorite speech of all time, but I will say that one that is definitely worth watching is Bobby Kennedy's impromptu eulogy to Martin Luther King.
Issue you most like writing about, whether it's at West Wing Writers or when you were in the Clinton administration, that you most enjoyed writing about?
Yeah, I don't, it's really hard to pick one, but I will say that at the moment, a lot of the clients that I'm working for are very interested in women's empowerment, and I'm very interested in that too.
Thank you thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us for this segment of YTV. Special thanks to Jonathan Edwards College and the Yale International Relations Association for their help. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Cody. To see the full interview, go to YTV's website under the Features tab.
And that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching YTV's final show of 2013.
We'd like to thank all of you, our viewers, for tuning in throughout the semester. Happy holidays, and we'll see you again in the new year.
Tune in for our first show of 2014, because it's your Yale, your week, and your news.